everybody. This is Dr. Diana Macys-Staley, and we are moving into part 2 of the translation of the K1 megalith at the Bosnian pyramids. So where we left off is we want to look at previous research and just some other facts regarding not only the K1 megalith, but the other megaliths that were found within the tunnels at the pyramid site. In the previous video, in part 1, I basically gave you an introduction to the Bosnian pyramid site and what we were trying to do from a data science and research level in order to do the translation of the ancient text. So the K1 megalith was discovered during the time of the initial excavations in 2006 in the tunnels which are near the Pyramid of the Sun. There are several pyramid structures located at the Bosnian pyramid site. The Pyramid of the Sun is the largest one that you see in the photos. And then there are several other pyramid structures in the Valley of the Pyramids there. One of the more interesting characteristics of the megaliths found in the tunnels would be the exterior coatings that are very shiny and resemble a ceramic type material. The K1, K2, and K5, and several of the other stones found within the tunnels are all made of this ceramic type material. In addition, they emit energy. The energy being emitted has already been measured and proven by research teams initiated by Dr. Sam Osmanagic in 2012. Working with Dr. Slobodan Mizrak, a physicist from Croatia, and Dr. Harry Oldfield, they examined the electromagnetic fields and frequencies and confirmed their findings. The K1 actually weighs an amazing 4 tons. It measures 260 centimeters long, which is 8.5 feet, and it's 170 centimeters wide, which is 5.6 feet, and it is 40 centimeters thick, which is 1.1 feet tall. The material substance and hardness of the K1 megalith is actually a superior quality. It is harder than the cement that you see today that is used for, building structures. The cement that you have in the structures today is anywhere from 10 to 40 MPs of hardness. When the K1 was tested, it actually tested at 100 MPs. So this tells you how hard this stone actually is. And this will be an important factor as we move forward to take into consideration. The type of stone that we have here resembling the shiny ceramic type finish with the sandstone color may be a key to finding more answers as we move forward. So that's another thing that we need to remember and look at and take notice of is this ceramic finish. Next, we're going to move on to examining each of the symbols separately. This will help to determine if they are indeed from the same period in time, or if there's a possibility that more than one culture carved the symbols on the megalith. That is something we don't know until we look at this further. Again, we need to remember there is a risk in reviewing each of these symbols with them possibly being from different civilizations or different time periods. So we need to validate and confirm several pieces of the puzzle in order to get the answers that we're searching for on this project. We will also look at the other interpretations that have been proposed on the K1 megalith translation. So I want to review these first briefly, and then we'll move on to the additional research and look more into the mind map and see where we'll go from here. In the diagram, you will see the first interpretation here, and this is an analysis showing the K1 to be a map that provides information on the pyramids and the tunnel system. This would be a logical idea that we could look at and say, yes, this is a map that has been carved on top of the megalith, and it might be pointing in a direction of like how to find the other tunnels, which way to go. So that would be like your typical translation and looking at the markings on the K1 just from a general perspective. Or it could be some type of a map is what they're looking at here in this particular diagram. This particular interpretation was done back in October of 2007. Now, many of the symbols, as you see on here, have been translated, so they're showing that the E symbol could actually be the Pyramid of the Sun. The other bridge-like symbol would be the Pyramid of Love. Pyramid of the Moon would be a different type of E symbol. And it kind of lines up with an aerial view of what we see of the pyramids that are on the location. Not all the symbols in this interpretation were utilized. So they were looking at this as showing like the ventilation system that the tunnels are providing from the pyramid. But this is again back in 2007. It would seem like it's a pretty good interpretation, but I kind of wanted to look further, and I think that I think it's more than that. So if we look at these different symbols here and talk about them a little bit more, we can actually compare them to some other eras and look at it deeper as far as the actual symbols are concerned. This is kind of just a general interpretation. Looks kind of good, but I think that we can find more answers, and I think that there is a different answer after looking at these symbols, and I'll explain why I think that. So let me explain a little bit about these symbols and what I noticed at first. And so if we look at a diagram and look at the actual symbols here, or letters or arrows found on the K1, the arrow type markings resemble that of the Germanic symbols or ruin symbols that we've seen back in 150 AD to 800 AD. The runes are an alphabet developed by the Germanic-speaking peoples during the Roman era, and they are based on letters from both the Roman alphabet and the Greek alphabet. It was later used for writing Gothic, Old Scandinavian, Old Norse, Anglo-Saxon, and the Old English, and some letters, such as the thorn, which means the, were used to write Old English and Icelandic. And actually, we still use the word the today. And in the Icelandic modern language, they also use the in the alphabet. The additional symbols in here, such as the moon symbol and the E shapes, or that E with the extra line on there, and the Y shapes, could be that of another culture. Researching the E-shaped interpretation, we find that it would be from some ancient Sumerian text and is a symbol for temple or house of the king. I could not find any documentation on the interpretation of this being a symbol for a pyramid. So that is kind of why I question that. The moon symbol is one that is utilized universally. across many languages. So we have to kind of look at this from a different perspective. The bridge symbol, having the translation of Pyramid of Love, is another symbol that could not be identified for the translation by any other cultures. So we need to kind of, keep that in mind as we move forward. Therefore, the translation as a map on this could be a logical assumption when you first look at it, but if we really look at this as being some type of language or message that another civilization was leaving for people that were coming through those tunnels, then we could say it is a map, but more than likely these are symbols. And what we want to do is find out, are these symbols placed on here at the same time? Were they done separately? Some of the symbols might have been there, and then somebody came by 100 years later or 200 years later and said, oh, we're going to add these other symbols to this to give it an additional meaning. So that's what I want to look at, because, when we look at it from this perspective, it kind of changes it. So we have more questions. And as we move forward, so just to sum this up, the information on the translations above are utilizing different periods of symbols from different civilizations, which could mean that different cultures or people mark these symbols at different periods. Additionally, the translation of the pyramids were, those symbols that, I couldn't really validate that those symbols actually meant pyramid, which are the E symbols. So those E symbols look like old Sumerian texts dated around the 5th century BCE, and it is possible to utilize that translation for our future translation of this. So we're going to kind of put that aside now and say, okay, this is where we're at the moment. Utilizing the information that we did find on these symbols will be part of this translation process. We must consider researching other languages and symbols that would match within the same period versus multiple timelines. Theoretically, we must review other clues at the pyramid and tunnel sites to validate this further, which is looking at how old those structures are. We will review some of the additional interesting information as we move forward, and then return to the translation of the symbols. Okay, so now we're going to move in a different direction here and look at some other research that was done as far as the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun is concerned, and the pyramid site there with the tunnels. In 2012, there were two Italian archaeologists, Dr. Riccardo Brett and Nicola Visconti, discovered some organic material within the blocks covering the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun. The results were breathtaking because, according to the carbon dating that was done in a laboratory in the Ukraine, the age of the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun is at least 24,000 years old, plus or minus 200 years. The other interesting thing about the pyramids at the site is that the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon have a connection. Researchers also believe that there is a clear relationship between the two pyramids, of the one of the Moon and the Sun. And the connection relationship is from an astronomical level, because the shadow of the Pyramid of the Sun covers the Pyramid of the Moon during the summer months just before sunset. The north face of the Pyramid of the Sun is perfectly oriented to the north, less than 1% of error with the way that it's facing in the direction. Having a height of over 220 meters, it is also believed to be the largest pyramid in the world, which we mentioned before. This Pyramid of the Sun dwarfs the one in Egypt. So this is kind of an interesting fact here, that we have this astronomical alignment where there's a shadow that appears over the Pyramid of the Moon. Is this related to our translation? It could be another clue for us. There is a general consensus that many of the megaliths were produced during the Neolithic times, which are from 9000 BCE to 3000 BCE, and the Bronze Ages, which were during the time periods of 2000 BCE and 200 BCE. The general speculation as to the purpose of the megaliths from around the globe were either related to burial sites, religious activities, or astronomical observatories for the sun or other celestial bodies. In researching hundreds of these megaliths around the globe, another interesting fact is that many have been moved from their original location. Utilizing the data on the megaliths being moved over the centuries, we can determine that on average, the megaliths that were relocated usually would be moved within 100 to 150 kilometers maximum from its original location. We have also seen the megaliths utilized as a cultural marker to express a message or mark a location with symbols on large stones. If we observe ancient megalithic structures from around the world, the majority have been carved into their shapes. The type of stone utilized ranges from granite, red granite, sandstone, dolerite, greenstone, marble, and limestone. It's obvious that the K1 megalith was not carved, but formed with a very smooth exterior, which is that ceramic sandstone finish. The Bosnian megaliths emit energy on top of it that have been tested. So they create the energy in addition to being a different shape, being made of this ceramic material that looks, very similar to a baked ceramic coating. So this is where we want to take a look a little bit deeper, because in order to make ceramic coatings or finishes, you would need to bake these stones at a very high temperature. So this is where I'm going to stop here, and we're going to take a deeper look as to what this is made out of, these particular stones, because if there's a process that was done by an advanced ancient culture that we're not aware of, we need to look at that. Could it be a volcano that heated those stones up and they were made naturally? Possibly, but then where did the markings come from? I don't think, with it being as hard of a surface and stone itself, that you would be able to carve anything into it after it had dried or had formed into the ceramic finish. So that's where I'm going to leave off. We're going to move on to part 3 and move into the next area, which, as I go deeper, it gets more interesting and more interesting as we go. Stay tuned for part 3.